Today is the second lecture for Chapter 8, and I'll be talking about regulation of energy balance and body weight. I have Mandy here again. We have negotiated a TA contract if I feed her a number of her favorite crunchies and snackies. So in terms of hormonal fluences, leptin was discovered not too long ago, when you think about 1994, and it's secreted by white adipose tissue, and it reduces hunger. So initially they had thought if we inject, or if they inject people or give them additional leptin, it will suppress appetite. It's not the way it works. There is a rare genetic disorder where there's a leptin deficiency. If that is corrected, then appetite decreases, but you have to be actually deficient for the addition or the administration of leptin to work. Insulin suppresses hunger by acting on the neurons that both stimulate and suppress appetite. So how many calories do we actually need? Theoretically, and again, everything in theory works on paper, as I always like to say, 1 pound of body fat equals 3,500 calories, and the average adult has 27 billion fat cells. So if you take in more calories than you expend, you will gain weight, in theory. We know it's not that simple, but it's basic law of thermodynamics. Just an additional 250 calories a day will result in a 1 pound increase in 2 weeks. So if I think about my setting, I work as a consultant in a healthcare setting, and some of the offices always have candy, depending on the time of the year. Is Valentine's Day or Easter or Christmas, and there's lots of goodies around. So just taking a few extra candies each day here and there is probably going to increase my weight. So I need to remember that. Genetics plays a role in our ability to get to the weight we want to get to. So we have the supermodels, we have the star athletes, they have a certain body type, and they're genetically predisposed to that. So we're all genetically programmed to a certain point where we can't overcome that without surgical procedures, probably. You need approximately 15 calories per pound to maintain your current weight. So just as an example, the way I think about this, often when I have morbidly obese patients, the knee-jerk reaction is for the doctor to say, oh, you need to be on a 1,000-calorie diet, you need to lose weight. Well, hold on here. If you have a patient that's 400 pounds, and roughly 15 calories per pound to maintain, so just to stay at the current body weight, that's 6,000 calories. You can hear Pollywog Dog in the background. Apparently there is a squirrel that has walked by. If you put them on a 1,000-calorie diet, they're not going to stick to it. It'll make them malnourished. So even a moderately lower calorie diet in a controlled setting or a therapeutic setting, a healthcare facility, is going to induce weight loss. They don't need to be on a 1,000-calorie diet, is what I'm saying, to promote weight loss. So think about that the next time someone says, oh, they've got to be on a very low-calorie diet. They actually don't, to lose weight, and it's that calculation. And this is an average. It's an approximation, excuse me, but I think you kind of get what I'm trying to say. We don't need to dramatically reduce calories to promote weight loss in morbidly obese individuals, or anyone really. There are a number of hormonal influences that impact whether or not we'll lose weight. Adiponectin plays a role in both glucose metabolism and fatty acid breakdown, so getting rid of those fats that we don't want. There's receptors in various locations in the body. I've listed them for you. When you calorically restrict your diet, which I was just talking about, this adiponectin increases. So it also increases with omega-3 fatty acid consumption, garlic, and the Mediterranean diet. And they don't understand the exact role, but it is, actually, I wanted to mention, I think some of the hormonal influences, some of the hormones we'll be talking about in terms of their influence on appetite, I think this is kind of an up-and-coming area in nutrition, and you can bet that the pharmaceutical industry is trying to figure out how they can bottle some of these hormonal hormones that influence appetite, and market them, obviously, to promote weight loss. I mean, think about that as what's motivating them, obviously, likely, is profit-driven, but, we had a few of them on the market a number of years ago. They ended up causing cardiac issues, and they were pulled off the market, but they haven't been able at this point to find a medication a pharmaceutical that will induce weight loss through appetite suppression. Some of the antidepressants, such as bupropion, will actually, as a side effect, induce weight loss. And there's actually a new one on the market now that has bupropion in it, if you've seen the commercial. But there's nothing yet that they found that's a sure thing. Ghrelin, I talked about in terms or in relation to the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass procedure. We see this hormone plummet after the surgery, and then eventually it does recover. It stimulates that feeling of hunger. It's a tap on the shoulder when you haven't eaten all day because you're a nurse that's worked a 12-hour shift and you have no time to eat. And then it comes roaring back. It keeps tapping you until you end up, unfortunately, overeating at the end of the day in reaction or in response to the high levels of ghrelin. CCK, cholecystokinin, is produced in the small intestine. We talked about this when we talked about digestion in response to food intake. And there are receptors in both the hypothalamus and the pylorus, which of course is the area of the stomach, the pyloric, or when we talk about the pyloric sphincter, that's where food meters into the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine. There are a number of other hormonal influences. I've listed them for you. The book goes into greater detail. Certainly you could explore those and look further into those. Peptide YY and glucagon-like peptide are being researched now. There's a focus on them. Intestinal microbiota has become a hot topic. They're now looking at intestinal flora in relationship to obesity. There is some evidence that indicates there's a link to be determined. There's the intestinal microbiota that they're looking at, or the flora, belong to those specific phyla, which I will not attempt to pronounce. And the certain level of these flora, or microflora, increase when weight is reduced. So they do know that long term, the dietary habits influence the flora and obviously impact the intestinal microbes. More to come. Again, it's kind of the hot topic right now. Environmental chemicals have been looked at in terms of contributing to obesity, obesogens, as they call them. They interfere with the hormones that we just talked about, their functioning. They also promote triglyceride production and deposition in adipose tissue, that big cell that I just showed you, that adipocyte that can just grow and grow and grow. There's some disruption in terms of appetite control, regulation, suppression, stimulation in the hypothalamus, and early exposure to some of these obesogens, they theorize, might interfere with the genetically programmed regulation for weight control that would have been genetically programmed, and these chemicals interfere with that. Lifestyle influences, I think, is a no-brainer. We do obviously still recognize that diet and physical activity influence energy expenditure, energy balance. So moderation, controlling food consumption, daily activity, and then the social and behavioral factors that influence the food choices and whether or not we exercise, whether we have time to exercise, or what that exercise might look like. So what are the health impacts of an altered body weight? There's two general shapes that we talk about. There's the gynoid obesity, which is the pear-shaped, and the android obesity, which is the apple shape with the central adiposity. The apple shape is associated with disease risk, primarily for the reason that the central adiposity is just what it says. It's centrally located fat over the visceral organs, and that is not good for your health. I think back, again, going back in the day, to the gym. I was a gym rat, and the powerlifters thought that their gut, they said, well, it's a powerlifting gut. What it was abdominal muscle over central adiposity, which is very dangerous and unhealthy. So, you know, if you happen to be pear-shaped, you're probably going to have less health risks related to obesity than you are if you have the apple shape. That's the reality. Again, I've mentioned already that the triglycerides enlarge the adipocytes, and there are new adipocytes, so new fat cells produced with the more ingested triglycerol. Triacylglycerol or triglycerides. I still call them triglycerides. Here's just a picture of body fat distribution, the lower body pear shape, and then the upper body apple shape. And again, upper body is high, it increases your risk for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, things of that nature. And they think that actually fat tissue does cause inflammation. It's inflammatory. Metabolic syndrome is a group of symptoms, if you will, that's associated with cardiovascular disease. So it's the central adiposity, high fasting triglycerides, so more than higher than 150, a decreased good cholesterol, decreased LDL, and then high blood pressure, hypertension. And the underlying mechanism is basically all boils down to insulin resistance. So you have high blood sugars, you have elevated insulin levels, and then you have the cells, sorry about that, that's sensitivity, in the muscle and adipose tissue become resistant to the insulin. So the insulin's like, enter the cell, and the cell's like, no, not going to happen. So with moderate exercise, this can be turned around quite nicely, actually. Even if there's no weight loss, exercise alone helps shuttle that insulin into the cells. Those insulin-resistant cells become more open, shall we say, to letting those blood sugars enter the cell. Energy balance, is it really as simple as energy in and energy out? Well, people would like to think so, and again, not necessarily the case. There's a number of factors. Weight loss methods, you've got to have a negative energy balance over a period of time. I told you that 3,500 calories equals a pound of fat. Calorie restriction alone can cause moderate weight loss. I go back to that example of the 400-pound person who needed to consume 6,000 calories to maintain that 400-pound weight. A modest reduction in calories will facilitate weight loss, will promote weight loss. They have shown that exercise alone is less effective than both. Obviously, you get more bang for your buck if you reduce your calories and you exercise. Most important factor is the intensity of the behavior modification. So what does that mean? That means you've got to make permanent lifestyle changes, not quick fixes. You must change your ways. That's why we advocate or we recommend small changes which add up to permanent behavior modification. So instead of modifying or changing all of your less than ideal dietary habits, picking one at a time, mastering it, and then moving on. That's what that means. And that concludes the second lecture of Chapter 8, the second and final lecture. I will see you soon.